needs and
Hello, Doruk. Yeah, I think everyone is tied up in the previous backstage, so I welcome you on my own multi-mentors. And I think if you can hold your presentation, you're live now.
I have some problems with hearing your sound. Is it from my side or it was
yes,
being jammed?
yes, I also couldn't hear Daria clearly.
Okay. So in the meantime, I will quickly share my screen with the presentation. So can you see my PowerPoint screen now? Just to clarify.
We do. Yes, please go ahead.
Um, Before that, I want to clarify something. This will be almost the similar presentation I've presented in the previous session, the video recording. So for those who have also joined and participated in that session, yeah, please bear with me for the discussion part. For those who are participating only in the doctoral session, I hope this will be an interesting one for you. So yeah, and I'm a doctoral researcher at Siemens, Germany, and I'm pursuing a PhD degree at the Johannes Kepler University, Linz, Austria. For my topic today, I'll be talking about my motivation towards developing an agile assessment model with a scientifically founded background. I'll talk about some of the existing approaches, mention some of the research questions and how we map them to the methodology. And towards the end, I will share the challenges and the future work. The motivation behind developing an agile assessment model is that we mentioned the Kinevin framework here. For those who are not familiar, I leave a reference back down below. The idea is contextually. The idea is enabling contextually appropriate assessments. So Kinevin framework suggests that you first need to understand the domain you're working in order to provide suitable solutions for that domain. If you are working with certain best practices in a domain that is unclear which mechanics the domain has, this might not work as it's supposed to work in a clearly known domain. So from that motivation on, um, establishing an agile assessment model for organizations running with agile methodology could be important understanding their current state, their environment, and what kind of domain they work on in terms of the complexity. When we started this research, I'm right now halfway through my research, and we started with a literature review to identify the existing aspects in the existing important aspects in the existing models, and we tried to learn from those studies who developed the assessment models. We tried to build upon these by learning from the relevant aspects they use, and we identified certain aspects that could be of relevance or of importance for the organizations when they assess their agility, which is not well reflected in the existing assessment models. So to wrap it up, our goal is to provide an agile assessment model that enables contextually appropriate assessments, which is lightweight, hopefully, and at the end, it's not tailored for a specific framework. So it's more driven out of the values and principles of the manifesto, of the Agile Manifesto. So in our literature review, of course, there were some criteria. I will not go very deep into it because of the time. And we identified certain comparison criteria. And we searched for the comparison of those studies. We had certain criteria already existing in the scientific work, And then we also introduced some new aspects or criteria of comparison criteria, such as manifesto awareness, artifact orientation, because we think the objectivity of an assessment is important. To establish the learning outcomes of that first study, which provided us the backbone of this research, there are valuable research available in the domain, but for those missing aspects, we want to build up on. So here I share some of the points, some of the findings of the first paper we published last year. And based on these learning outcomes, we build up on and then try to continue. For the research questions are mainly towards understanding what valuable components are there in the existing assessment models, what approaches are there, to see how these existing models reflect different organizational contexts where, let's say, the organizational scale or the distribution of units within an organization is one element, for example. Also, we try to understand how to build up on the existing structures. So we use Agile principles and values to establish the initial structure instead of being practice driven. And then we also, of course, want to identify whether it would be relevant for industry in the end. Also, as like relevance, completeness is another criteria we are focusing on. And in the end, we want to not to benchmark organizations with respect to their agility, but we want to provide improvement paths for the organizations with respect to their own context and their own goals. So these are the research questions we establish around this motivation. And when we map this to our methodology, we plan an action design research in the overall sense, which started with a literature review for the problem formulation phase. For the intervention and evaluation of the design artifact, we are conducting expert interviews, especially for this structure, to establish the structure of the model. The next steps will be conducting a case study to reflect on the process and actually receive feedback, because we see action design research as an agile way of developing this model itself. And at the end of the research procedure, hopefully we will be providing this design artifact as this agile assessment model, which I share in the first slide as our goal to enable lightweight assessments, self-assessments, and also to provide contextually appropriate assessment possibilities for organizations. Of course, there are some challenges. Integration and differentiation, I mentioned particularly in my first talk in the morning. We have to consider different disciplines, because Agile is not only about the software development process. Although software development, quality, these aspects are really essential to Agile. This is the purpose, perhaps, why Agile exists at the first place. But we should not be overlooking human-related aspects when we are talking about assessing agility or establishing the current state about Agile. This requires us to integrate different components from different schools of thought. We want to end up with a business relevant assessment model, so that it's not only a certain amount of publications at the end of my research. We want to be driven out of values and principles of manifesto, which is really important for us. And we even have a critical look to those principles, because there are some resources who kind of criticize the principles themselves by perhaps not being principles, but certain assertions or practices by definition. We touch on the soft factors, and soft factors um, being the human-related aspects, communication-related aspects within teams. But this is not easy, because this requires a different viewpoint on the agile assessments. methodology and orchestrating this methodology element, as I mentioned in my previous slide, is also somewhat challenging because it requires asking many people for their contributions so that we can receive feedback and then iterate again. And this is always time consuming from that perspective. Coming up with consistent level definitions is another challenge because if you're trying to establish an assessment model, you kind of want to, or even a maturity model, you want to build up on these leveling structures in a coherent way, which is always has some taste of subjectivity, which we try to avoid by providing artifact-oriented questions so that we can overcome this. And we need to address these different organizational contexts at the first place, which is as well a challenge because there is no end to change because that's so essential to the entire thing. So I will just wrap it up with these contributions. The idea is we want to come up with a scientifically validated and practically relevant Agile assessment model, which has this different perspective on organizational context. And hopefully we will build up on the existing literature and come up with something useful and relevant. Thank you for your attention. Now we can switch to the discussion part, I guess.
Thank you very much, Doruk. Can you hear me now?
It's breaking.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and I
Okay.
can hear Daria breaking. So
Okay.
it's trembling, Daria, your
Yeah,
audio.
from my side
I will
as well.
type my questions.
Oops.
It's really difficult to follow you.
I think she's going to write the questions.
Okay,
Yes.
super. So thank you for the presentation. Nicole and Jamel, I'm not sure whether you want us to moderate entirely or whether you moderate and we ask the questions. Anyhow, thank you very much for the presentation. Then Daria is writing, Aurora, do you have a starting questions or question, or shall I?
Well, just a curiosity, because I see you have a lot of research questions. I think maybe too much question for a PhD study. What is the reason for that? You are very ambitious.
So this was one of the reviews I also received when I submitted this paper, that I have to condense my focus because I'm
Yeah.
trying to integrate, as I mentioned, within this integration and differentiation. I'm trying to integrate multiple viewpoints on this assessment model so that we can talk about completeness. But as I received that feedback earlier, we need to condense down the focus so that it can be more productive at the end. But this was the reason behind having multiple research questions and perhaps too many research questions at the first place. So yeah.
Yes. So Daria has written down a question in the chat that I think opens up a follow-up to this. She writes, I would like to ask a fundamental question about the core constructs in your research. What do you assess? What is Agile in your context?
So I can mention these structural components because since the submission of this paper, we provided the structural construct of this model. I'm right now basing this model on the publication from Ahmet Sipki, and this is mainly on 5 pillar principles of coming from Agile Manifesto, condensed version of those 12 principles. And yeah, I'm distracted by the question. Sorry. I will just wrap this one up and then get back to that one. So with respect to the no problem. With respect to the this construct, we have 5 pillars. We talk about software product delivery. We talk about human centricity. We consider customer collaboration, technical excellence, these are the things that we establish as 5 pillars for this model. And then within these 5 principles, I'm clustering practices. And for those practice clusters, these are actual activities of Agile software development methodology. And yeah, this will be the frame of this assessment model. So this will be based on 5 principles. And then within those 5 principles, we will be having practice clusters. And for those practice clusters, we will be we will be trying to evaluate agility based on that. And then we will aggregate that mechanism upwards, hopefully.
Thank you. I think Daria, the second part is also somehow answered. The second bit of that you wrote. So, oh, there is a big one. I think we can take that one.
So
okay.
I will go one by one. When I Agile software development methodology, I take Agile as is, and then within that umbrella, let's say, I see, let's say, Scrum, which is defined as a framework, and the lean methodology is coming from Toyota line. This is something that falls under. So, but people, for example, also consider lean agile as a mindset. We also try to address that one within the model, because I mentioned in the previous talk, in the question session, that people have very different understanding of agile. And some people refer to Scrum as a methodology, which defines itself as a framework of Agile software development methodology. And these definitions are somewhat sometimes hard to address. So that's why I take Agile software development methodology as an umbrella. And then within that umbrella, I address different frameworks, practices, and principles. So I don't know if it.
I think you mentioned now the fact that terminology is an issue here, and I agree with you. I cannot emphasize how much I care about that, and I agree with you that there is a lot of confusion, and I think you clarified. When you say agile, you mean the manifesto, and when you speak about practices, you don't speak about the method like Scrum, but you speak about something else that you haven't covered or discussed yet.
Let's say pair programming
Yes.
is a practice
Yes.
coming from the XP, which falls under one methodology of the umbrella of Agile software development.
Yes, I understand. Would you be able to comment on one of your research question is related strongly about the completeness of the model, and then I think we go into the relevance that Daria mentioned in her next point. I think now that you have clarified, agile is the umbrella, practices are like pair programming. What do you mean by completeness?
So the completeness in this case for having these, when I say organizational context, completeness would then be what is relevant and what is being used within an organization based on their needs. So what is valuable for a particular unit, we can understand by asking them their targets, their goals, giving them some idea about what we are looking for, but having their feedback on their targets so that we can see how we can identify that improvement gap. And completeness would be the point which enables that. So we have the enough guidance for